always assume the baseline model gets better and better, but data is ultimately always a great moat. And you can either have your own data that you're collecting somehow, and that helps mostly the incumbents that already have unique, useful data assets, or you get really good at ingesting company internal data too, right? That is a moat also. If you look at most of the general purpose platforms that were doing very specific things, like Lean for a while was just doing enterprise search. Now they're general enterprise productivity. Writer.ai was just AI for marketing. Now they're doing general enterprise productivity. So you are actually seeing a movement away from just one tiny niche, and then a lot more expansion from a lot of different players in more general purpose enterprise productivity.
Hey, I'm Brandon, CEO and co-founder of Paragon. Today on Future Proof, we chat with Richard Socher, CEO and founder of U.com. We discuss building for the future of enterprise work, competing with industry leaders like OpenAI, and have chat as the final interface. Enjoy. Hey, Richard, thank you so much for joining the podcast. Really excited to have you on today. How are you doing?
Doing very well. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So really excited to get into some of the exciting new updates that U.com has announced recently. And we'll get into that here in just a bit. But before we do, would love to start with just a little background on your story and how you started U.com, going from a professor at Stanford to being a startup founder and CEO. Tell us a little bit about that experience and what led you to starting U.com.
Yeah, so I came to the US as a student from Germany and did my PhD at Stanford in AI. Had the idea to really want to make natural language processing actually work. It was a lot of sort of hand designing of features, and each task had its own sort of group of people that worked on that task, like machine translation or sentiment analysis for many years, built their careers around that one task. And I thought we should really not get so task specific. And I, in 2010, tried to push neural networks into the field of natural language processing. And there was a lot of pushback back then and a lot of rejected papers and sadness. But after a couple of years, the field started to warm up to the idea that words can be general vector representations, that not just words, but sentences can also be vector represented well by a vector. And so we got basically further and further into more and more different areas of NLP. So we got into more and more different areas of natural language processing, and then eventually won Best Computer Science Thesis Award, but no one in the world was teaching neural nets for NLP either. So I started teaching one of the first classes in the world on that. And then after the PhD, mostly also worked on a company called MetaMind that tried to make it very easy for any other company to train their own neural networks. This was before there were any open source packages for this and so on, right? I just wanted to make it a bit more accessible. We eventually got acquired by Salesforce, where I became chief scientist, and then after 2 years, executive vice president, running most of the AI groups within Salesforce. And we had a phenomenal time there, hired a lot of really good researchers, and also invented what is now called prompt engineering. Basically the idea that you don't just have to train one model for your input representations like words and sentences, but also having one neural network that you give the task as another input to. And that can be done in the form of a question. What is the sentiment? What is the translation of this sentence into German? What is the summary of this paragraph? Those were all questions that were given to one network. That paper also famously got rejected, but then did get picked up by OpenAI and cited as the first instance of this idea that you can train a single net with all kinds of different questions and get answers back. And so I was hoping that with this, we would have a better answers as consumers. But Google is just so stuck, and they're just like making money. They make so much money, they didn't know what to do with it. They built self-driving cars, internet balloons, and all these other things. Yet the answer quality was pretty stagnant. And so we started U.com initially thinking it would be a consumer search engine, because that's how we thought people would want to get their answers. But eventually realized that most consumers ask fairly simple questions to their search engine. And there's actually an unbundling wave where they're okay asking specific questions for food to like Yelp, and for small purchases to Amazon, and to certain kinds of shopping things directly to TikTok or Instagram. And so for complex work queries where this technology can really shine, we got most traction and we can double click into this some more, but basically are now focused on enterprise productivity because that is the killer app for LMs right now.
Makes sense. And so do you think that sort of unbundling way that you mentioned leads to there not really being unified answer engine, at least for consumer users, that they would be using for every type of query across different, like you said, food or like daily work, personal questions, maybe a lot of what people use GPT for? And is that sort of what led you to carving out a more specific focus for the enterprise market, for the enterprise use case?
Yeah, there are a bunch of different reasons, and maybe we'll double click into them. Number one is chat ads work much less well than search ads. So you're going to make a lot less money than Google used to be able to in the past. They will also have to transition as users just push them enough, right? And companies like OpenAI, who have a real consumer traction, push them enough. That's number one. Number two is the vast majority of questions that users ask are things like, what's the weather tomorrow? What was the score of the game? What's the price of the stock? Who's the president of Ukraine? Or whatever you might want to ask. And none of those kinds of questions are questions where you can be 10x better than Google. You get the answer within 1 second from Google, and like an LM isn't going to describe the weather in very flowery language, and that makes it a 10x better experience, right? It's just a very simple thing. And so when we looked at this and we learned very quickly, and I think some of our competitors are going through those lessons, but when you spend so much money on marketing, it can cloud the fact that you don't have real product market fit, and people ultimately don't have a strong need to switch for the most part, their Google experience. You learn somewhat depressing statistics, like I think over 80%, I don't know where I saw this statistic, I have to look it up somewhere, but like it's fairly intuitive. Over 80% of people who use an iPhone, for instance, never change any setting, like zero. And so yes, like it theoretically is 5 clicks away only to change your search engine in Safari to something else, and people just don't do it. And one, they don't have the strong need for it, and B, they don't know how. And then you need to also basically catch up to Google with all the simple little things like navigation. Now you have navigational queries. Now you need a maps integration. Good luck building better maps. So you end up just incorporating Google Maps into your thing if someone asks for directions and so on. So those were the con arguments for consumer, but what's actually more relevant are the pro arguments for enterprise, where you can essentially see users just loving our technology and appreciating that we're more accurate than OpenAI's deep research, than all the other small competitors' deep research, than open source capabilities when we write really complex research reports. And they're 20 pages long. They have 300 citations. They create graphs for you. They search over your company internal data and merge that with public web data. That's where insurance companies and hedge funds, consultants, financial analysts, they all can rely on you.com. And that's where we ultimately have seen such a draw and pull from that market that we're going after that much more.
Yeah, absolutely. Makes sense that there might not be as much opportunity for those 10x experiences for the consumer market, but there are definitely those 10x opportunities for enterprise customers in the enterprise market. And I know you.com recently announced a new enterprise productivity agent that actually outperforms OpenAI's deep research. And you tweeted recently that it is possible for smaller startups to actually outperform OpenAI for some of these more specific use cases. So would love to hear your thoughts on how was you.com able to build a better agent that is able to outperform OpenAI for these use cases, and maybe more broadly for other product leaders and founders who might be building startups that are competing against OpenAI in these specific areas, how they can think about outperforming them or doing what you have accomplished.
Yeah, there's a lot of complexity here. And of course, everyone is going to call BS on you saying you're better than OpenAI. And they're like, that's not possible, right? So you have to be very transparent with it. So what did we actually do? So we basically, in AI, there's still benchmarks, right? And you have to show that you're better on these benchmarks, and you have to make it so that people can actually verify that is indeed the case. And so we published results on both an external benchmark from Harvard, Google, DeepMind, and Facebook Meta, and our numbers on that, as well as a better benchmark for more complex real world work queries, like complex prompts that result in and are asking for very long research reports. And so we call our dataset Deep Consult, and the publicly available dataset is called Frames. And we showed results and actually open sourced all the code, shared all our answers, went actually manually because there's no API through the OpenAI deep research results, and then showed the code for how to evaluate all of this and automate that evaluation, and then published all of that in GitHub. So you can essentially verify that indeed we are the most accurate. So that's number one. What is it actually? And that is, I think, the only way. Everything else is subjective, right? You can claim you're the most accurate, but you have to actually show it, and it has to be verifiable. Then how did we actually do it? We focus more and more on these complex work research questions. And partially it is more usage of intelligence, right? So we're spending more tokens on things. And there's sort of famously, we're all seeing here that the marginal cost of intelligence is going down, yet it's still pretty high in terms of really accurate, complex research answers, right? And some of those questions actually cost us multiple dollars to give accurate answers in research reports to. And then at scale, certain companies are maybe not willing to spend that much money on answers. So you have to package it properly too, and have proper margins and things like that. I think if you have gangbuster growth, a lot of VCs don't care about your margins, but eventually everyone will care about their margins. And if you just spend more money than you make, the more you grow, that gravy train will end at some point. And we have focused on these deep research questions, and through that focus have been able to be more accurate. And then of course, the last, maybe more on the technology side bit, is that a lot of people forget the search infrastructure of AI. But if you want to make LLMs accurate, up to date, or have citations, you need to have a very strong search backend, both over external data on the web as well as private data on your own internal company context. And we having been in search for a while, actually have spent quite significant resources on making that search more accurate and are getting better and better at it. And that is a big component of why we end up being more accurate. And then maybe one thing, it's not just objective numbers too, we have more citations, more unique sites, and more overall sources for each of these reports. But we also we're the first actually to create automated graphs inside a chat window. That was very novel 2 years ago. And we were the first to allow you to just create an image within a chat window that some people ridiculed, saying, oh, they don't know what they're doing. And now every chat bot has image generation inside of it as well. So in many ways, at U.com, we actually were the first in the world to do something. And I'm really excited. We finally hired a great CMO this week to make sure more people know about this. But fortunately now, at least our sales team is really working very well, and we're increasing revenue massively. And that's the ultimate proof that you need. I'll pause there. There's a lot to unpack in how you evaluate. And that you're 100% that it moves very quickly. We're now the most accurate. I'm sure in 3 to 6 months, someone will pick up these benchmarks and spend even more resources on it. And you can't stand still.
Yeah. First of all, congratulations. That is incredible. And I guess for other founders and product leaders who are building AI startups that might be competing with OpenAI in certain areas, do you have any advice on where they can maybe apply similar strategies to carve out specific niches? And I'm not sure if there's maybe a specific industry vertical or a very specific use case of deep research that maybe you found especially strong product market fit in. But for other product leaders, founders, maybe how they might think about applying similar framework.
Yeah, I think you want to choose a niche, right? That is the standard advice. You want that niche to be large enough and relevant enough and help you build out useful technology, but still be the best in that niche. What's interesting is that even general, very niche platforms like Write.ai, for example, started out with just AI for marketing. But now if you go to their website, it barely mentions marketing at all. It's just a general purpose productivity platform. We, having come from a general purpose search background, have been a general purpose platform, but even we are now going deeper and deeper after certain verticals. Like consultants, we're seeing a lot of tractions with. We're seeing a lot of folks in financial analysis and financial services appreciating more accurate answers, not fake citations where you sprinkle links into text and look clowny in front of your coworkers when you say certain facts and they're not right. I think there's that building that trust will take some time. I think in terms of other lessons for startup founders is you can always assume the baseline model gets better and better, but data is ultimately always a great moat. And you can either have like your own data that you're collecting somehow, and that helps mostly the incumbents that already have unique, useful data assets, or you get really good at ingesting company internal data too, right? And that is a moat also. So we provide a lot of private RAG solutions and then have all the LMs that you might want, like from Anthropic, from OpenAI, from Microsoft, from Google Gemini, from Grok, and like all of the LMs are all available within u.com. They're also abstracted away. You don't have to know about any of them because a lot of users are like, I don't know what any of this means. Claude, Sonnet, 4, 3.7, it's all the same to them. So we extract that complexity away from them in an auto mode, but in each organization usually has a couple of real deep experts and nerds that want to find out what the latest model does and how it answers certain questions differently. So we give them access to that and future-proof their organizations from all that change management. And so I think that continues to be a powerful layer. Ultimately, I think the infrastructure layer and LMs that are purely API based are going to get commoditized more and more over time. The margins are going to get thinner and thinner. Open source is going to get better and better. And they're going to look more and more like the big telcos. Yes, there are some really big telcos, but this huge CapEx, like not great margins. And in many cases, you don't capture as much of the value there. Similar to, you can only use Uber if there's like Verizon or T-Mobile, but then neither of those two get a cut of Uber making a bunch of money on top of their network. And so I think there's something similar. So most of the value is going to accrue in the apps layer. And then on the one hand, AI is very different to everything else that has come before in technology waves, but there are some similarities too. And ultimately, when Instagram became really famous, there are like thousands of other photo sharing apps. It turns out it wasn't that hard to build a photo sharing app on a mobile phone. But all the little things like your sales, go to market, marketing, branding, consumer experiences, support, service, like all these little things around it, the design, they become more and more relevant to then try to compete with others. And so I think we're going to see back to the basics. Yes, you can build something quickly with an AI prototype, but to make it really good and break out of all the other ones, you have to just maniacally focus on your users or your customers. I'll pause there. There's a lot to unpack, right? It's like very complex because there's so much that you can double click into it. And I see a lot of companies also at AIX Ventures that I started a venture fund where we're seeing a lot of movement and really exciting companies that are going after small and smaller niches, just like accounting for manufacturers or like tax automation for like financial services. And there's every little niche now has like half a dozen or more startups that are going after that particular niche.
Yes, definitely. I'd actually love to get your thoughts on sort of your vision on the future of work. And obviously, it's just changing very rapidly. There are new startups, AI startups solving different parts of the problem for different industries. And I know you have thoughts on the different waves of AI transformation and maybe where we're at today, where we'll be in the future. As a starting point, as a starting question, do you think that chat is the final interface for enterprise productivity for the future of work? Or do you think that we're going to evolve from this agentic chat interface for every specific vertical niche and type of problem?
Yeah, so I'm a big believer in language, obviously in natural language processing and that being a great interface, but I also was never a big believer in pure voice chat interfaces in the sense that very often when I ask what are some good restaurants close by, I don't want to have a voice listing me like 10 restaurants that are like, the first one is 3.7 miles away and it has a 4.5 star rate. I just want to see a map with like good visuals, right? And so as we were thinking about automation more and more, you realize you're just going to replicate a little bit of Expedia and a little bit of Yelp and a little bit of Amazon, and like all these different interfaces have been iterated on for years. to show you all the right information to make like a purchasing decision or something like that. And I like similarly don't think in enterprise workflows, you're going to replace everything with a pure text interface. What I do think is that like in the entire way and the landing pages, if you will, of enterprises can look like chat interfaces on steroids, right? I can actually see a future that is not too far away where a company can start every employee every day on a u.com like interface where you can ask questions, you can get really accurate answers, you can spawn your agents building and automating workflows for you, creating artifacts for you, and ultimately see a transition into that kind of AGI-like interface. But these artifacts are going to be much more complex, right? And it's not just going to be like simple, like here's one graph or something. It can be much more complex artifacts. And then I do think whole thing could be considered still a chat interface and that you interact with it mostly in natural language, but you're going to have your dashboards. And there's this famous quote, I think it was from maybe the Rippling CEO and I'll butcher it, but like in the end, all enterprise software kind of converges on reports, permissions, data workflows or something like that. And that's true because that is how people do work. Now, I think if you project even further out into the future, you will eventually be able to have a 5-10 person company that becomes like a massive unicorn, or maybe a higher bar is actually making hundreds of millions of revenue by having people that know how to delegate all their work to their AI agents. And I think that is probably the biggest shift that we're already seeing now. Like already now, every employee should learn how to delegate tasks to an AI. And that delegation is a hard skill, actually. Like most people are individual contributors doing their work. They don't have this process in their mind like CEOs often do, which is if I'm doing this more and more often, at some point I should delegate that task to someone else. That someone is going to be an AI agent. And so that skill to think at higher levels of abstraction, to learn how to, in very unambiguous, clean language, delegate a task, and onboard, if you will, an agent to do that task for you, that is going to be the biggest shift. And because of that, we're now actually offering companies a full transition package into AGI where they get role-specific training for how to actually use that technology. And that's where we're seeing a lot more usage of our platform. And ultimately, it's a win. Companies are seeing the efficiency gains that they're hoping for. They're seeing the adoption within the company, and they're using our product more.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So, in this world, how much do you think we'll see that unbundling wave that you mentioned from the consumer markets for enterprise agents? Will I have an agent for accounting, an agent for marketing, an agent for engineering? We could go pretty deep in terms of how much the agents might need to specialize. Even within engineering, there could be a dozen different roles that agents could be highly specialized. You could delegate this type of work to. How much do you think that we're going to see that unbundling take place in the enterprise market? Or do you think there might be some consolidation that will eventually converge to?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I do think there's a space for having a general purpose agent platform like u.com, but I also feel the obvious pressure to make sure that general purpose platform has example agents that are good enough and as good as the more specialized platforms. But if you look at most of the general purpose platforms that were doing like very specific things, like Glean for a while was just doing like enterprise search. Now they're general enterprise productivity. Writer.ai was just AI for marketing. Now they're doing general enterprise productivity. So you are actually seeing a movement away from just one tiny niche and then a lot more expansion from a lot of different players in more general purpose enterprise productivity. And I think that is because I'm sure they're following market pull for various reasons too. So yeah, and we started with that, and we're now going into more and more deeper verticals, and we're going to see that in the next few weeks, what that will look like.
Really cool. I know you have some thoughts on AGI, and would love to hear your perspective on how you think AGI might affect that transformation and that future of work in the next few years, if and when we get there.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of alpha to be had right now in being constructively optimistic about AGI timelines. As a former sort of academic and also German, I often had some skepticism for various timelines. At the same time, the technology is improving so much. Then you're saying, hey, we're all going to Mars, but on the way there, every year you reduce the cost it takes to send 1 pound or kilogram into space by a lot. People are going to be happy. If you say we're going to have self-driving cars later this year, but you keep selling more and more cars, no one's going to complain that you're don't have the full self-driving car yet, because you're making more and more revenue, building more and more driving assist features, right? And so I think that is an interesting balance. I used to err on the side of just being under-promising and over-delivering, in many cases for you.com too. I think I am seeing more and more that depending on the definition of AGI, it's already here. Like in some sense, when we published the DECA NLP paper in 2018, you could ask in one model, what's the summary? What's the sentiment? What's the translation to German? Who's the president in this paragraph? What are the relationships between these people? Like that was a first general intelligence, right? And it was one model that was generally able to answer all different kinds of questions. Now, depending on your definition of AGI being like exactly like the smartest human for months, which is like some people now are raising the bar more and more to what AGI means. Some people just say the bar for AGI is we can automate some parts of work. And then we're now talking about super intelligence to be even smarter than people. And there's a lot of exciting work to be done and research still to be done there. I think we're sort of hitting the upper bounds of what you can do with just scaling to more data. Now you need to start to be clever about reasoning. You need to be clever about simulations. You need to be clever about any scenario where you can verify or simulate. Because if that's the case, then AI can solve everything in that domain. Like programming and math, for instance, you can actually verify each step. And so you can, for any proof out there, ask the AI to hallucinate a lot of things. And then you can verify whether each step was correct or not and ended up in the right place. And boom, you can like probably change all of mathematics in the next few years. So there's still a lot of low-hanging fruit. But long story short, if you define AGI as automating 80% of the workflows of 80% of the digitized jobs, then I think we're going to get there in the next few years. And then there's only a question of how quickly can this roll out. I'm very skeptical of the fast takeoff scenarios often because there are human incentive systems that will slow things down. Concretely, we already see much slower adoption, for instance, of AI for music because there's a lot of copyright and the copyright folks are trying to transition copyright into learn also. Then we see a lot of slowdown for AI agents on the web because most of the web makes money through advertisement. And if you ask your AI agent to book a flight to New York for work, it's not going to get distracted by this ad to fly to the Bahamas over the summer. And hence, like, that company will make less money from ads, and hence they're going to try to block all those AI agents doing work for you. And you're already seeing OpenAI's operator and so on getting blocked on the web. So there's a lot of molasses or like just slowness in systems that will prevent some takeoffs. And then we're seeing things where, depending on the kind of question even that people may have, the cost to deliver it is still too high. Yes, the marginal cost of intelligence is going down, but I'll give you an example. It hasn't gone down enough to give this one user, this was a while back, a good answer, which is tell us all the NFL players that were born in one of these 3 Canadian cities and now play in a team in Florida. And the user complained that you.com gave a certainly incomplete answer. And I did the math a little bit. Unless you get lucky and you happen to find one table on the web where it's like all the NFL players that ever played, all the cities, whether those cities were in Canada, and then their teams, and then which teams are in which state, which doesn't exist anywhere online, you now have to go through hundreds of thousands of NFL player names, make lots of searches, go through all their different websites. So now you're going through millions and millions of different websites, extracting all the facts from it, then reasoning over all of this. And then long story short, the complete version of that answer probably would cost you like $5 to $10. And like when you ask the user how much is that worth to you, they're like, maybe a cent or two. I was just drunk and wandering with my buddies. And that's the problem in consumer context. And the answer is the marginal cost of intelligence hasn't gone down enough for us to be able to replace that hard work, if you will, like with an AI. And so we're going to see those various places too. Like maybe eventually we can have a robot, for instance, that cleans my apartment, but that robot is going to be fairly expensive for a while to be better than a human cleaning team for an apartment. Anyway, I'll pause there. AGI is super exciting to talk about it for hours.
No, absolutely. I think we're moving so quickly today that we may be getting there very soon, or like you said, in some ways, we may be there already. So very excited by you.com. Congrats again on all the progress. Thank you again for joining our podcast today. This was great. I learned a lot from our chat today, and just want to say thank you again.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks so much for watching. If you found this helpful, consider subscribing to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube to get all the latest episodes. And to view our past episodes, visit us at viewsparagon.com/futureproof.